The storm swallowed the city whole, lightning tearing the sky apart while rain slammed against glass and concrete. From the shadows of his luxury car, a millionaire CEO watched as the world blurred into chaos. He had built his empire on control, on silence, on never looking back. But then through the downpour he saw her. A child, no more than 6, barefoot, trembling, clutching a soaked blanket as the storm ripped away what little protection she had. Alone, fragile, forgotten. That single image cracked something inside him. He could have driven past. He could have let the night erase her. But instead, he opened the door and, in that moment, he stepped into a story that would change both their lives forever. What happens when power collides with innocence, and a man haunted by loss makes a promise he cannot break? Stay with Usend. Subscribe to Silent Lies for the truth. The storm pressed itself against the city like a living thing, swallowing streets and smearing light until Seattle looked like a painting left out in the rain. From the back seat of a car that purred rather than spoke, Gavin Whitmore watched wipers carve brief, failing windows through the downpour. The sound was steady and mechanical, but the night did not care. Water rushed along the curbs, rattled drains, hammered glass. The sky would not hold. He had asked his driver to take the long way with the same calm he used when authorizing acquisitions. No reason given. None required. The date had arrived again as it always did, without invitation. October 17th. He never wrote it down. His muscles kept the memory for him. The car drifted along Madison like a ship feeling the edge of a reef. He folded his arms and leaned forward as if proximity could sharpen the world. Even through the water, he could feel that old unwelcome pull at the base of his throat. The city was a grid of discipline and glass, but nights like this stripped it to bone. The driver lifted his gaze to the mirror once, question forming. A flicker cut across the corner of Gavin's sight. He sat up. Stop. The word left his mouth harder than he intended. Brakes sighed. Tires hissed. The car eased against the curb. Under a bus shelter that did not shelter much of anything, a small figure sat folded into herself. She was a thin line of resistance against the storm, bare feet pressed flat to concrete that bled cold into her skin. A blanket clung to her like paper. Hair hung heavy and tangled. She kept her back straight, as if a straight line might be all that kept the night from breaking over her. It should have been impossible. A child alone in this kind of weather, on this kind of street, in a city that claimed to know better. It was not impossible at all, it was only wrong. Should I, sir? The driver had already loosened his seatbelt. No, stay here. Gavin opened the door and stepped into water that climbed his shoes with the speed of a tide. The first lash of rain on his face felt like a dare. He moved slowly, umbrella opening with a soft bloom, careful to let his voice be a sound and not a force. Hey there. Are you all right? She did not answer. Her shoulders tightened under the soaked fabric. Eyes turned to him, too large in a too small face, dark with the kind of fear that learns quickly. He lowered himself to a knee at the edge of the sidewalk. His trousers drank the water without protest. My name is Gavin. I want to help. Do you have someone I can call? Your mother. Your father. At the word mother, her mouth trembled, and the rest of her held. I cannot, she said, barely a sound in the weather. Mother said, do not go with strangers. She is right, he answered, and the truth of it tasted like iron. That is smart. It is late. It is cold. You are alone out here. Her gaze flicked to the umbrella, then to the black car with its warm interior and shut doors. She said nothing. The storm filled the space between them with a long breath. Can you tell me your name? She waited a moment, as if names were currency, as if giving one away could make her poorer. Lena, she said. He repeated it, slower, letting it land. Lena, I will not make you do anything, but tell me where your mother is if you can. A swallow worked down her throat. Hospital, she said. Big one. White walls. They made me leave. Visiting hours. The knot in his chest turned. You have nowhere else to go. She shook her head. Mother was all we had. The words were not dramatic. They were only true. He did not look away now. Wet pajamas clung to her shins. The soles of her feet were red. She tried to hold herself still and could not stop the trembling. He reached into his coat and brought out the only card that carried his name without adornment. He placed it at the edge of the bench so that she would not have to reach toward him. This is my card. I live 10 minutes from here. We can call the hospital. We can get you dry and warm. Then we will go back in the morning and find your mother together. She stared at the card the way a child might stare at a distant coastline. aware of the distance more than the promise. "I have hot chocolate," he added, the words appearing from a place he rarely let speak. A long beat opened and carried the weight of everything that could go wrong. She said, "She is alone in there. I am alone out here." He moved the umbrella so it covered her more than him. "Then let us not be alone anymore." She did not leap. She did not even stand at once. She measured. She gathered her blanket and wrapped it around herself with the care of someone who understood what little she had. She moved her bare feet to the pavement and walked in small, deliberate steps toward the car. He opened the door. She climbed in, quiet as a secret. Inside, the city became a muted watercolor again. She said in a small voice, "She is in the ICU. I have nowhere else to go." He looked through the windshield at lights that slid down glass like tears. "I am not walking away," he said, and felt how those words set in his chest with a weight that steadied rather than sank him. The elevator to the penthouse moved with a soft whisper, opening onto a room that had never learned how to be a home. Marble held the reflection of recessed light, and tall windows presented the skyline like a silent performance piece. Not a cushion out of place, not a book open to a living page. He had built it to be perfect, which is to say, he had built it to keep the world out. She did not step forward at first. She remained inside the doorway as if a line had been drawn, as if crossing it might invite consequences. "Make yourself at home," he said, and heard the hollowness. He caught the absurdity and let it sit. She set one foot on the floor and left a wet print that strung itself into a trail. He noticed and decided not to care. He found towels, a shirt that would hang on her like a sail, a pair of drawstring pants. "You can use the guest bathroom down the hall. Towels are on the shelf. Take your time." She nodded and moved past him, the blanket trailing rain. The door clicked shut with a small final sound. He stood in the kitchen with the storm pressing its fingers down the windows. The smell of wet fabric and cold air dragged up a memory he had buried under 100 deals and 200 quiet nights. A porch that smelled like mildew. A boy of 7 locked out while the thunder counted the seconds between fear and lightning. Lights on inside. No one coming. He closed the door on the memory the way he always had, but it did not seal completely. He warmed milk, listened to the soft churn of the machine, searched cabinets for marshmallows he did not remember buying. When she returned, the oversized shirt turned her into a small white flag, and the pants bunched at her ankles like clouds. She held her wet clothes to her chest, uncertain where to put the evidence of where she had been. He took them and slid them into the laundry room. He set the mug in front of her. She cupped it in both hands, bent and blew gently. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome," he answered. The quiet that followed did not press him into a corner. It simply waited. "What is your favorite color?" he asked, a question that surprised them both. "Purple," she said after a few seconds. "Mother likes green." "Good choices," he said, and let a smile arrive without announcement. She drank and steadied. "Is it all right if I stay here tonight?" she asked. "Of course. You will be safe here." Her shoulders fell in a small release that looked like air leaving an overfilled balloon. She said, "Mother says we should not bother people. She says we will be fine. You are not bothering me, Lena." She did not answer. The hope in the room lifted its head and did not flee. He showed her the guest room with its immaculate bed and too many pillows. "Would you like the door open?" She nodded. "I will be down the hall," he said. "Call if you need anything." She climbed into the bed with the careful movements of a child who has learned to respect other people's spaces more than her own needs. He waited at the doorway. "Will you come back in the morning?" she asked, voice small, as if it might break if she heard anything but yes. He stepped closer and crouched. "I will be here," he said. "I promise." She studied his face as one might study a sky for clearing. She turned into the pillow. He stood for a long moment with the door almost but not fully closed, the seam of light holding the promise open. Back in his room, he did not change. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, as if an answer might be written there. The life he managed had always been a tight ship in calm water. Tonight it felt like weather, but he did not resent the wind. There was a sleeping child down the hall who had nowhere else to be. That was a fact that did not ask for a strategy. It asked for a presence. He lay back, fully dressed, and listened to the storm ease itself into a steady drumbeat. For the first time in a long time, the silence inside the apartment did not feel empty. It felt like a space that could hold more than one life. The elevator whispered open with a soft chime, releasing them into a space built not for warmth but for precision. Gavin's penthouse loomed in sleek surfaces and sharp lines, the kind of environment that discouraged fingerprints and discouraged life. Floor-to-ceiling glass displayed the storm as if it were an expensive painting rather than a living force still battering the city. Lena stood just inside the threshold, barefoot and trembling, a damp silhouette against a palace of order. The marbles shone beneath recessed light, each square polished to perfection. Yet her tiny feet left marks, dark blooms that faded slowly behind her. For years, Gavin had demanded that no trace of the world interrupt his fortress. Tonight he felt strangely unwilling to erase them. "Make yourself at home," he said, though even he heard how hollow it sounded. The words fell into the air like glass ornaments shattering. His voice had carried confidence into boardrooms and negotiations, but here, in front of a child who clutched a blanket like a shield, it rang brittle. She did not answer, only took a cautious step onto the marble, her blanket trailing water in delicate patterns. Every movement was deliberate, as if she were crossing into forbidden territory. Her eyes flicked toward the windows, toward the leather couches, toward the silence itself. The apartment was a gallery, and she the intruder. "Would you like something warm to drink?" he asked, searching for ground. "Hot chocolate, maybe." She nodded slightly, a quick dart of the head, though she never loosened her grip on the blanket. He gestured toward the kitchen, sleek with granite counters and untouched appliances, and she followed him like a sparrow trailing a hawk warily, measuring every step. When he pulled out a chair for her, she sat without a word. Her eyes swept across the room, catching details with quiet precision. He excused himself, returning moments later with clothes too large for her, his own shirt and lounge pants that would drape her like sails on a fragile mast. She stared at them, hesitant, until he pointed toward the guest bathroom. "Towels are on the shelf. No rush." The bathroom door clicked softly behind her. Gavin exhaled, his shoulders lowering just slightly. He leaned against the counter, staring at the windows while the storm drummed its relentless rhythm. The smell of damp fabric still lingered, summoning a memory he had long buried. He was a boy again, soaked through on a porch that smelled of mildew and old wood. Lightning had illuminated the night, but no hand had opened the door for him. A stepfather had slept inside, unreachable in drunken silence. Gavin had cried so quietly that even the storm seemed louder than his fear. He shook the memory back into its coffin, but the edges pressed through. When Lena returned, she wore the oversized shirt like a robe, sleeves covering her hands, pants pooling at her ankles. Her hair, combed back with fingers, still glistened with water. She held her soaked pajamas bundled to her chest, as if surrendering them would make her vulnerable. He relieved her of the burden gently, tucking the clothes into the laundry room. Then he set a steaming mug in front of her. The marshmallows dissolved into white swirls on the surface. She cupped the mug with both hands, whispering a thank you that barely carried across the counter. "You're welcome," he said, surprising himself with the softness in his voice. Silence stretched, but it did not choke. He found himself asking questions he had not asked anyone in years. "What is your favorite color?" "Purple," she answered quickly, then added, "Mother likes green." He nodded. "Good choices." The quiet resumed, not heavy but tentative, like a space that could be filled without breaking. She sipped slowly, the tremor in her hands only partly from the cold. "Is it all right if I stay here tonight?" she asked suddenly, eyes darting to his face and away again. "Of course," he said. "You'll be safe here." Relief washed across her features, subtle but unmistakable. She admitted, "Mother says we shouldn't bother people. She says we'll be fine." He met her gaze steadily. "You're not bothering me, Lena." She lowered her eyes, lips tightening in an almost smile that dared not grow. After she finished her cocoa, he led her to the guest room. The bed was too perfect, sheets tucked with military precision, pillows piled high. She hovered at the doorway, her fingers tightening around the frame. "Would you like the door open?" he asked. She nodded. He turned down the bed, laying an extra blanket at the end. "I'll be in the room down the hall. Call if you need anything." She climbed into the bed slowly, pulling the blanket to her chin. Her gaze flicked toward the window where rain tapped lightly, as if reminding her of the night still raging outside. He stood in the doorway, uncertain. "Will you come back in the morning?" she asked, her voice fragile, almost dissolving into the dark. The question struck him with unexpected force. No one had asked for his presence in years. He crouched closer to her level. "I'll be here," he said. "I promise." She studied his face as though searching for proof, then turned into the pillow. He lingered, pulling the door until it remained slightly ajar, leaving a strip of light as a promise fulfilled. Later, in his own room, he did not undress. He sat on the edge of the bed, fully clothed, staring at the floor as if decisions could be written there. He had intended to spend the night with scotch and silence, numbing the date that haunted him. Instead, a child lay sleeping down the hall. For the first time in years, his solitude felt altered. Not broken, but reshaped. The storm outside had softened to a steady rhythm, a lullaby against glass. And in the quiet of his fortress, Gavin Whitmore realized that tonight he was not alone. The morning broke gray, the kind of dawn that felt reluctant to rise. Mist clung to the skyline, blurring the edges of the city into something half-dreamed. Gavin had already made his decision before the sun had climbed. His phone lay on the counter, the unanswered flood of emails silenced by a single message sent to his assistant hours earlier. Postpone everything. Personal emergency. He had never canceled before. This time, the word emergency meant something more human than corporate. Lena sat at the table, legs folded under her, sipping from a small glass of juice he had found buried at the back of his refrigerator. She ate cautiously, as if even toast was too generous a gift. Gavin studied her small frame, still draped in clothes too large, and felt something tighten inside him. This child had walked alone through rain to a hospital she was forced to leave. That knowledge pressed on him more heavily than any boardroom expectation. "We are going to the hospital," he said. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, but she said nothing. She simply nodded, gripping her backpack as though it were armor. The car rolled quietly through the thinning fog, carrying them toward Mercy General. Gavin had funded world-class clinics, lectured at healthcare summits, and signed checks larger than entire departments' annual budgets. Yet the moment he stepped into the hospital lobby, the sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and old air pressed against him. This place whispered not of innovation but of survival. Peeling posters warned of flu shots. Vending machines hummed beside cracked tile. The receptionist looked up, her eyes flicking from Gavin's tailored coat to the child at his side. "We're here to see Maggie Parker," Gavin said, his tone calm but unyielding. "Family only," the woman began, but he cut across her words with quiet steel. "She is her daughter." The receptionist blinked at Lena, recognition dawning. "Oh, you're the little one from last night." She nodded quickly, whispering the room number before returning to her screen. They walked in silence down the hallways where echoes of machines and muffled voices lived. The ICU greeted them with its mechanical hum, heart monitors, ventilators, and the low shuffle of nurses. Lena led the way, small but determined, stopping only when they reached a dim room marked 204. She froze in the doorway, clutching the frame with her tiny hand. Gavin stepped beside her, his jaw tightening. Inside lay Maggie Parker, tubes threaded into her arms, an oxygen line feeding her breath. Her face was pale, skin stretched thin against bone. The machine beside her hissed rhythmically. The sight rooted Gavin where he stood. For Lena, there was no hesitation. She stepped forward and climbed onto the stool beside the bed, her hand immediately finding her mother's hair, brushing it back with a tenderness that broke him. She pressed her lips to the back of her mother's hand, whispering, "She hasn't smiled in weeks. I think she forgot how." The words struck like a blade of quiet truth. Gavin's throat worked, but before he could speak, a nurse entered. She was older, her expression sharp yet gentle. She paused at the sight of Lena, then turned to Gavin. "Are you the guardian?" "No," Gavin said evenly. "Just here to help." The nurse flipped through the chart, her voice lowering. "Your mother's condition is critical," she said to Lena before shifting her gaze to Gavin. "Severe endocarditis. Infection has reached the heart. She needs surgery fast. We've done what we can, but with no insurance and no listed kin, there's nothing more here." Her eyes flicked to Gavin again, narrowing slightly. "Whitmore," she said slowly. "As in Whitmore Innovations?" He nodded once. Something shifted in her stance, a sliver of hope sneaking into her practiced professionalism. "If there's anything you can do, there is." Gavin interrupted, already pulling his phone from his pocket. "Transfer her file to University Medical. Arrange a private room. Cardio consult today. Costs covered. Keep her stable until the ambulance arrives." The nurse's face softened with relief. "Yes, sir," she hurried out. Gavin turned back to Lena. She had not looked at him once through the exchange. She simply held her mother's hand tighter, her small body rigid with fear and exhaustion. He walked to the counter, found a stack of papers, and placed his business card beside a faded photo of Maggie and Lena. On the back, he scrawled a message with steady hand. You are not alone. She isn't either. When Lena finally raised her eyes to him, they carried more questions than any child should ever need to ask. Gavin's voice lowered. I am not here as a CEO. I am here as someone who is staying. The corridor outside felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Gavin dialed his assistant with urgency he had not felt in years. This is not about me, he said sharply. It is about Maggie Parker. Critical transfer. Foundation priority. Within minutes, he was on the line with Dr. Sanders at University Medical, authorizing every cost, demanding every barrier removed. His voice was clipped, professional, but beneath it ran something he rarely allowed to surface: compassion unrestrained. By the time he returned, arrangements were already set. Private ambulance in 2 hours. Cardiac team on standby. Lena sat on the stool, tracing the edge of her mother's blanket with one finger. She looked up when he entered. Really? She whispered. He crouched beside her. Really? Relief flickered in her eyes, but it was fragile, mixed with fear that hope might vanish if she clung to it. When the ambulance team arrived, Gavin gathered Lena's small belongings. At the bay doors, he crouched again to meet her gaze. You ride with her, he said softly. I'll meet you there. She hesitated, searching his face. Promise? His answer was steady. Promise. She climbed into the ambulance beside her mother. The doors closed with a hollow clang. Gavin stood in the drizzle as the siren lit up the morning, the vehicle disappearing into mist. He slipped a hand into his coat pocket and felt the folded drawing Lena had shown him earlier: 3 stick figures beneath a rainbow. She had written Gav beneath one of them. For the first time in years, Gavin felt a vow mean more than any signature he had ever placed on paper. He turned toward the waiting car, the city blurred and damp around him. He was no longer simply a man who kept his distance. He was a man who had chosen to stay. The ambulance lights carved through the mist as Gavin's car followed at a steady distance. He did not notice the drizzle clinging to the windshield or the weight of the city still half asleep around him. His focus was fixed, sharp in a way it hadn't been in years. He was no longer moving through the world like a detached observer. He was part of this story now, whether he wanted to be or not. By the time they reached University Medical, a sterile glass structure rising above the fog, Lena had already been escorted inside with her mother. Gavin strode through the lobby with a presence that made heads lift. The receptionist glanced up, recognition flashing instantly. Room 412, she said before he asked. They've just arrived. The 4th floor smelled of antiseptic and quiet determination. Nurses moved briskly, but with purpose. Gavin entered the room to find Maggie Parker settled into a private bed, her pale skin drawn tight but less gray than before. Machines beeped in steady rhythm, IV lines carefully monitored. Lena sat curled in a cushioned chair by the window, juice box in hand, watching everything with wary eyes. When she saw Gavin, her shoulders loosened. You came, she said, not surprised, only reassured. I said I would, Gavin replied, setting down the paper bag he had carried in. Breakfast. Apple muffins, cocoa, and one of those yogurt cups with the cartoon bear you mentioned. For the first time, her lips tugged into something close to a smile. Thanks. Hours stretched into days, marked not by meetings or contracts, but by Maggie's slow progress. A nurse updated them with cautious optimism. Her vitals are stabilizing. No infections spread in the last 12 hours. Early, but hopeful. Lena straightened at the word hopeful, clutching her mother's hand tighter. Gavin only nodded, quietly insisting that any expense, any treatment gap would be covered without question. In the quiet moments, Lena drew. Pages filled with crooked houses, trees, and rainbows. Always she drew windows. 3 at first: Mom, me, Gav. Later, a 4th appeared labeled Us. Gavin taped each drawing to the wall above the monitor, the crayon colors bright against sterile white. To anyone else, they were childish scribbles. To him, they were stained glass, fragile yet radiant. One evening, he found Lena by the hospital's small garden. The hydrangeas were tired, the koi pond murky, but she walked the path with solemn interest. Mom used to take me to places like this, she murmured. Gavin looked at her, noting the way she held herself too still, the way her fear lived just beneath her skin. She will again, he said softly. Her eyes flicked to him. She used to draw flowers, but she stopped. He paused, then admitted, I know what it's like to lose someone and pretend you're fine so no one sees the cracks. She turned to him, studying his face. Who did you lose? My sister, he answered. On a night like that one. She didn't pry further. She just nodded, as though understanding was enough. Back in the room, Maggie stirred for the first time. Fingers twitching, eyelids fluttering. Lena leapt from her chair. "Mom!" The heart monitor spiked as Maggie's eyes opened, unfocused but alive. Her lips parted. A rasp, barely audible. "Lena." Tears broke from the child's face. Quiet sobs years too old for someone so young. She climbed onto the bed, careful not to disturb wires, pressing her cheek against her mother's shoulder. Maggie's hand moved, weak but deliberate, stroking her daughter's hair. The nurse rushed in, checking vitals, smiling as she whispered, "She's waking up." Gavin stood motionless, throat tight, as the scene unfolded. When Maggie's gaze finally found him, confusion clouded her eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I'm Gavin," he said slowly. "Your daughter found me. Or maybe I found her." "Why, help us?" she asked, voice fragile as wind against glass. "Because she asked me to stay," he answered simply. A tear slid from the corner of Maggie's eye. She studied him for a long moment, as though testing the weight of his words. Then, with fragile conviction, she whispered, "Don't let her be alone again." He didn't speak a promise this time. He only nodded. His hand, steady as hers, rested over it. It wasn't a vow spoken, it was a vow lived. The following days brought rhythm. Gavin arrived each morning before his assistant could call, his suit jackets replaced with sweaters, his briefcase filled with sketchbooks and juice boxes instead of contracts. Lena claimed the guest suite at his smaller Magnolia house, taping glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling and covering the walls with her drawings. Maggie's recovery was slow but sure, doctors cautious yet optimistic. One afternoon, a representative from Child Services met Gavin in a quiet office. "You've provided care, medical expenses, lodging, and you're not related?" the man asked. Gavin answered simply, "No, just someone she trusted." "And you'd like to apply for temporary guardianship?" "Yes." "Why?" He thought of the drawings taped to walls of Lena searching for him in every room. He thought of Maggie's fragile voice pleading for her daughter not to be left alone. "Because it feels right," he said finally. The man studied him for a moment, then slid a stack of forms across the desk. Later, Gavin returned home with Lena. She ran to her new bedroom, now alive with stars and sketches. "Can I make it mine?" she asked. "It already is," he replied. She taped another drawing to the wall, a crooked house with 4 windows, each window labeled, "Mom, me, Gav us." She looked up at him shyly. "So we know we're together, even in different rooms." He knelt beside her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "You gave us a place to be," he whispered. For the first time in years, he felt silence transform, not a cage, not an echo, but a home. The day Maggie was discharged from the hospital dawned with hesitant light, a sky still stitched with gray but touched by the promise of warmth. Gavin stood beside the car as Lena held her mother's hand, helping her navigate each step with the seriousness of someone far older than her years. Maggie leaned on a cane, her body frail but her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. When she crossed the threshold into Gavin's house, she paused. The walls were decorated with Lena's drawings, stars glowing faintly on the bedroom ceiling, and a glittery welcome sign taped unevenly above the kitchen counter. Tears gathered in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Gavin told her. "You're home." They didn't move in officially, not yet. But days blurred into weeks as Maggie grew stronger in the downstairs guest room, and Lena's laughter stitched itself into the fabric of Gavin's once silent home. The penthouse downtown, with its immaculate surfaces and unyielding silence, was abandoned in favor of this smaller Magnolia house, a place that smelled of crayons and fresh muffins instead of polished marble and loneliness. Gavin found himself adjusting to a new rhythm. Board meetings became secondary. He canceled retreats, delayed negotiations, and began reviewing investment decks at the kitchen table while Lena sprawled across the floor drawing trees, windows, and stick figures under rainbows. Sometimes she'd tug on his sleeve and say, "You need more green there," and he'd smile, letting her dictate colors as if she were rewriting his life one crayon at a time. Maggie improved slowly but steadily. The doctors warned her rehabilitation would be long, but she met every milestone with quiet determination. She would walk again without the cane. She would sew again. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday soon. Gavin visited the hospital daily during her therapy sessions, always bringing crossword books or soup. He listened when Maggie spoke about her fears in a voice softer than she wanted Lena to hear. He reassured without promises, just presence. Evenings were different. Sometimes they sat on the back porch, the bay stretched out before them, the air heavy with salt and the faint sound of gulls. Lena would swing her legs off the chair, dressed in pajama pants and one of Gavin's oversized shirts she refused to give back. "Do you think we'll always stay together?" she asked once, her voice quiet but piercing. Gavin wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. "Yes," he said, steady, "as long as you'll have me." She didn't answer, only tucked her fingers into his sweater as though anchoring herself to the promise. Inside, Maggie often teased him over small domestic failures. "You'll never fold a fitted sheet." She laughed one morning, watching him struggle in the laundry room. That thing wasn't made to be tamed. He shook his head, chuckling. "Then that makes two of us." The laughter that followed was not loud, but it filled corners of the house that had been empty for years. The transformation of Gavin's world wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, subtle. A toothbrush next to his own, 2 mugs in the dish rack, a trail of crayons across the counter. The silence that once ruled his life had been reshaped into something living. But the past lingered, always threatening to intrude. Some nights he found himself awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering that storm when his sister vanished from his world. The guilt still coiled in him, but when he rose to check on Lena finding her asleep beneath glow-in-the-dark stars, her stuffed rabbit curled under her chin, something inside him softened. The darkness no longer swallowed him whole. It met resistance in the form of a child's steady breathing and a mother's fragile recovery. One evening, Lena ran into the kitchen clutching a new drawing. "Don't look until I'm ready," she said firmly, spreading the paper out on the table with careful hands. When she finally unveiled it, Gavin froze. The house was boxy, slightly crooked like always, but this time 4 windows shone brightly. Above each one, a name. Mom, me, Gav, and the last us. He knelt beside her, his throat tightening. "You did more than draw a house," he whispered. "You gave us a place to be." She smiled, shy but proud, and pressed the paper into his hands. That night, after Lena had fallen asleep, Maggie sat on the couch leafing through an old photo album Gavin had unearthed from storage. She paused at a picture of his sister standing by a lake in summer light. "She was beautiful," Maggie murmured. "She was everything," Gavin replied quietly. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind that was no longer oppressive but sacred. Then Maggie looked at him, eyes wet. "You saved my daughter." He shook his head, voice low. "No, she saved me first." In that moment, Gavin realized his life was no longer built on marble and silence. It was built on 3 voices, 3 hands, 3 windows that would never be dark again. For the first time since he could remember, home wasn't a fortress. It was a family. Summer pressed its hand gently against Seattle, the kind of early warmth that carried the memory of spring in its breath. Gavin's smaller magnolia house stood among quiet streets, its garden just beginning to bloom. Lena watered the pots barefoot, humming softly, a ritual she had made her own. The sight of her, alive with purpose in the morning light, had become the rhythm of Gavin's days. It had been 5 weeks since Maggie first opened her eyes in the ICU. She still moved slowly, leaning on her cane, sometimes dozing mid-conversation, but her recovery was steady and undeniable. Each day she climbed further from the edge she had once hovered near. Gavin brought soup, crossword puzzles, and scribbled notes from Lena, who filled paper with stick figures, hearts, and crooked rainbows. Maggie read every one as though they were scriptures. One afternoon, Maggie looked at him over the rim of her hospital cup, eyes tired but steady. "You're doing more than helping," she said, nodding toward a drawing taped on the wall, 3 windows, each with flowers. "You're building something." Gavin shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of her words. "I'm just trying to make things easier." She smiled faintly. "No, you're making things possible." He carried her words back home, and when Lena greeted him with a new picture, he understood. This drawing was of another house, boxy as always, but this time with 4 windows. In each, Mom, me, Gav, and the last us. A bright sun shone above the roof, vines crawling up the sides, flowers blooming wildly. In the yard, 2 figures stood holding hands, smiling as though the world had finally made sense. Gavin stared at it too long, throat tight. Lena whispered, "I wanted to make a window for all of us, so we're together, even in different rooms." He knelt beside her. "You gave us more than a window, Lena. You gave us a home." When Maggie was discharged, Lena crafted a welcome sign from glitter glue and printer paper. She hung it crooked above the kitchen counter, grinning proudly. Maggie paused at the doorway, taking in the scattered crayons, the drawings taped to the walls, the faint smell of cinnamon rolls Gavin had picked up from Lena's favorite bakery. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," Gavin told her. "You're home." Life shifted quietly but irrevocably. Days became measured not in contracts but in conversations. Evenings filled with puzzle pieces spread across the floor. Maggie's laughter when Gavin fumbled with a fitted sheet. Lena's triumphant squeals when she finished coloring in a rainbow. Gavin's once immaculate life now bore the marks of presence. 2 mugs in the sink, a toothbrush beside his, faint crayon streaks on the dining table. Silence had not disappeared, it had transformed. One evening, Maggie sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, Lena asleep inside. She looked at Gavin, eyes glistening. "She told me about the 4 windows," she said softly. "One for each of us, and one we share. She calls it the us window. She said it's where the light never goes out." Gavin smiled, the image lodged deep in his chest. She's right. Later, when he tucked Lena into bed, he lingered at the doorway. Her nightlight projected constellations across the ceiling, her small body curled beneath blankets, breathing steady and safe. For years, Gavin had stood in rooms filled with silence, believing it was strength. Now silence felt like a gift, a hushed presence of belonging. Weeks turned into months. Maggie regained strength, her laughter growing louder, her steps steadier. She teased Gavin about his seriousness, laughed at his inability to fold laundry properly, and sometimes caught him staring at Lena with a softness he didn't know he carried. One night, after Lena had drifted to sleep, Maggie sat with him in the living room, an old photo album spread across her lap. She stopped at a picture of his sister, frozen in time on the shore of a lake. "She was beautiful," Maggie said. "She was everything," Gavin replied, voice breaking. They sat in silence, not of emptiness but of understanding. Finally, Maggie reached for his hand, whispering, "You saved my daughter." He shook his head. "No, she saved me first." For the first time in decades, Gavin Whitmore was not haunted by silence. He was held by it. Not a silence of absence, but of presence. The kind that filled a house with warmth, laughter, drawings taped to walls, and promises that endured. A silence reborn into family. The story that began on a storm-soaked night at a bus stop had found its way into something deeper. A vow lived, a window where the light would never go out. There are moments in life when everything changes, not with a grand gesture or a dramatic announcement, but with a choice. A door opened on a stormy night. A child's trembling hand reaching for trust. A vow whispered not to walk away. These choices became the thread that stitched together 3 broken lives into something whole. Gavin Whitmore began as a man defined by silence. A boy once abandoned in the rain had grown into a CEO who built walls of glass and marble to keep the world at bay. But when he stopped his car and stepped into the downpour, he unknowingly stepped back into humanity. Lena, fragile but unyielding, taught him what it meant to be seen. Maggie, her strength buried under illness, reminded him that healing is not only physical, it is the courage to believe again. This story is not about wealth. It is not about status. It is about presence. The presence of a man who once turned away from pain but chose at last to stay. The presence of a child who carried hope in crayon drawings taped to sterile hospital walls. The presence of a mother who, against impossible odds, returned to her daughter's side. And in the middle of it all, something universal was revealed. Family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by promises kept in the darkest hours, by trust rebuilt in fragile moments, and by love that chooses to remain even when leaving would be easier. We all carry storms inside us. We all know the sting of nights that feel endless, when the world seems indifferent to our pain. But as Gavin, Lena, and Maggie remind us, even the fiercest storm can lead to light. Even the coldest silence can be transformed into belonging. So ask yourself, what promise will you choose to keep? Who in your life needs you not to walk away? Sometimes the smallest decision, the quietest vow, can change not just one life but many. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and the strength of connection, then let this not be the end. Join us as we continue to explore the untold, the dramatic, the stories that pierce through silence and reveal the truth of the human heart. Subscribe now to Silent Lies, because the most powerful stories are the ones that stay with us long after the screen fades to black. And perhaps the next story will be the one that changes you.